Hi, I made a video a couple of days ago showing some Python tips that I thought people might be interested in, and I forgot a couple, so I'm just making a hopefully short video to show what I didn't do. Now, in the last video I showed how you could use AND instead of if, and I kind of demonstrated it by having a Boolean called debug and going debug and print if you only wanted to print if you were debugging. Now this was just to demonstrate, and there's a much better way to do it than this, and it's using function aliasing. Now I got the idea from when you in C++ you can use a preprocessor, and this is C++, and what this does is it defines debug, so whenever debug is in the program it replaces it by 1, and then it says if debug equals 1, then you define anything that is debug with anything in the brackets, that's the parameters for that statement. You replace it in the program with serial.print with whatever is in brackets. That's just a kind of placeholder, it could be anything in there. And the same with debug line and serial print line. Otherwise, if you aren't debugging, this line here just says you replace everything in the program that is debug with any parameters with nothing. So that means when that's the preprocessor, so when the program is compiled, it isn't that you've got like a commented out line, it just doesn't exist, which saves space and everything. Now that you can do in C, because C++ is a compiled program, but language even. So in Python it's an interpreted language, so you have to do something a bit different. So what I've done is I'm using function aliasing. Now function aliasing, I'll just get that down there. Function aliasing, you can shell. Right. You can just create a function for aliasing. So I can go like this. Right, get the max number equals max, and then if I just go get the max number of 2, 5, 12, 0, there, 12. So it works exactly the same as max does because it's just an alias of it. And you can tell it's actually the same function if you do something like that. Whoops. And that. If you look at the IDs, it's exactly the same number because it's exactly the same object. So that is how I'm doing this. So I'll just explain what I'm doing. Right, if debug is false, whoops, have I got, oh no, sorry, not if debug equals false, I'm setting it up, and then I'm just saying if debug print underscore, you can just add an, if you like the name of something but it's a reserved word, you can just put underscore at the end if you wish. So my alias for print is print underscore. But if I don't want to debug, I set print underscore to be the alias of do nothing. So that means it actually, if I go print underscore when debug is false, it will call that function, and do nothing just does nothing. And the reason why these args and kwargs here means that it can cope, that function can cope with any number of args being passed to it, or any number, arguments, or any number of keyword arguments can be passed to it, or none. It isn't a magic name, args or kwargs. You could go star cats and star dogs, it would still work the same. So then I will just show you how it works. View shell, clear that. Right, we will just run that. So here we go. There's my do nothing argument. I've set debug to false. Therefore, I'm setting print underscore to be an alias of do nothing. I'm just printing out the IDs, and then I'm doing the print underscore just to print a blank line, and then that's the normal print and the debug print. So if I run that as it's false, all I ought to get is that. Oh no, I get those as well, but all I get is that. So fingers crossed. There, I get the IDs and get normal print, which is all fine and dandy. So true. And of course you can apply this to all sorts of things. You could create aliases for other functions, but the only thing that I've really thought would be useful is when you want to debug or print for debugging or not. So we'll do that. Right, this time it's printed the IDs, then it's printed a blank line, which proves that it copes even if you don't pass any parameters. Then it goes normal print, debug print. There, I thought that might be useful. Right, going on to lists and why you ought to have a trailing comma at the end of them. Right, here's a list of names. Now I prefer, rather than having it like that, to split it up like that. There's several reasons. One, it's easier to find what you're looking for, and if you keep if you put the first item on a new line after the square bracket, and you have the square bracket there, things like when you've got version controls and everything. So if you're working with other people and you look at program, the version control, and you say, right, that line was amended or deleted or added, is easier to see. So if, say, you had you didn't have the trailing zero, and then someone wanted to add a line, so here they are, they're adding Derek with or without a trailing comma, and so the version control will say, yeah, you've amended that line, no, added that line, and you've also amended that line. And people will say, well, what have you done to that line? So if you just have the trailing comma, that stops that. But you have to be careful with commas. If you've got a list like that, and you didn't, you added a new name, and you didn't remember to go up there with the jolly old comma, we'll just run that. Oh, get rid of that. Right, there, I've added another one at the end. I hadn't noticed there wasn't a trailing, where am I? I hadn't noticed that there wasn't a trailing comma, so that's what you get, and it doesn't throw up an error because it just concatenates those two, which isn't what you want at all. So I mean, it kind of get worse if say at least they're the last two, but your numbers would go completely out of sync if you forgot the comma there. Yeah, you're actually getting the first, that's a nought, the first item, and it's wrong. So that's a thing that you want to steer clear of, which is why keeping the brackets on a separate line, the bracket at the end on a separate line, and having a trailing comma will help. So what else? Oh, and the same thing goes with dictionaries. I mean, that is so much nicer than if you have it on on one line. And another thing that I like to do is to do the same thing when you're doing an import, as opposed to going from that import star when you don't really know what you're importing. If you do everything explicitly, if you put things in a comma and line them up and they're all in alphabetical order, that is so much better, in my opinion. Right, next tip. Opening files. You might want to just write some text to a file, as in like that. Now, I haven't put anything in saying if something goes wrong, you know, like the try and except thing. So you open the file, you write to the file, and you close the file. But you might forget to close the file. It doesn't really matter. Well, it isn't good anyway, because it will close it at the end of the program. But a better way to do it is to use with. So you go with open as F, which is the same as F equals open blah blah, and you go write to the file, and then you drop out of that indented code and it automatically closes it for you. And that's kind of that's the equivalent of what it does. You open it, you write it, and then finally you close it. Now, I prefer that. Next thing, sometimes if you're writing code, you want to, you haven't written your function yet, but you know you're going to have that function, so you do something like that. Def finishes later, not passing any parameters, and you just go pass. Now, that is more difficult to notice in your code that you haven't done something than if you go ... because ... stands out more than pass, because pass is just another word. But that is my preference. Now, in the last video I showed if you just wanted to reverse something, you go in square brackets on the array or a string, you just go colon -1. But you might want to do that to all sorts of things. So we'll just show what that does. There, numbers in that in a list ranging from 1 to 10. You're printing them backwards like that, and then you're printing that backwards like that. But it might be more complicated. You might be wanting to say from position 5, print them going backwards, and then whatever, and then you want to do the same thing for another string or list or whatever. So what you can say, you can create a slice, and that's, you go something or other equals slice, and then if you're just having a colon, you go none, another colon, none, and then that's -1, And then when you want to, I'll move that up a bit, then instead of going print numbers, doing, you can go print numbers, rev, and the same as print text, rev. So I'll just show what happens there. And there we have exactly the same result. And you can change it as well. You can put parameters in there, because the none might be a number. So you could either have that as a number or as a variable, and equally that could be a number or a variable. And I've actually created a variable step to say do it, you know, every going in backwards in steps of 2. So I'll just show what that does. Copy, paste. There. And it means you're only doing that colon, whatever the step is, once, and you're putting it in rev. So there we go. It's kind of going HLO space OL. Yeah, that's right. So that's just a few ideas, and that's my video.